Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. It's good to have you here. Hope everyone had a great July 4th holiday. We enjoyed the week off and we're back at it again today. Our agenda for today is we're going to do a little news catch up, some of the FDA EUA stuff, a little bit of new news on that. Want to point you to some COVID data sources and also remind you about some local events that are coming up. After that, we've got Denise Graves with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation talking to us about early stage translational research and the programs that she runs at MEDC for that. After that, we're going to kick off our inaugural From the Frontlines segment with Dr. Niki Kennedy. Niki's been a contributor before and she's representing ArborHive. And this is going to be a really fun reverse pitch kind of thing that we're going to have going about once a month. And it's going to be really fun to hear the voice of the doctors. After that, I want to talk to you a little bit about medical device recalls with FDA, and then we'll have an open time of Q&A and check-ins with the community. So without further ado, I'm going to stop this share and we're going to switch over to the news. I have to apologize, we're running new hardware these days and we're still learning how to use it. And hopefully that's showing up for everybody. I want to remind you, first of all, about the FFMI's Idea to Impact webinar series that Michelle Larkin told us about a few weeks ago. They are up to the July 22nd one next, which is unique considerations and the clinical utility of medical devices and diagnostic technologies. But they've been running this webinar series. Anyone has access to it, and we encourage you to tune in to that. On the FDA emergency use authorization front, if you recall, we spent a lot of time here together before. What's been a little bit in the news is the imported respirators. That list is changing, and you remember before it was welcome all respirators, and then it was, well, the ones that we're getting from China, we don't know that we can trust. The data is not reliable. Now what you're going to see is in Appendix A of those imported respirators, there are about 66 brands that are still being welcomed in, but respirator models removed from Appendix A, that list is almost as long, and they've removed 57 otherwise available respirators from that list. So that's been about a 50-50 split right down the path. One thing we haven't talked a lot about recently that we talked a lot about when this show was COVID Connect was data sources. And sometimes it felt like we were actually, we had better data at the outset. Now it's been hard. The folks at The Atlantic, the reporters there, established something called the COVID Tracking Project. We've been getting a lot of mileage out of this, and we just thought we'd share it with you, because what they've done is they're aggregating data, but they're aggregating it with all of the nuance attached to it, not just the headlines that you see, but all the nuance attached to it. And they've been talking also about state level grades. And this is really neat because as you've become aware, not all the states are tracking in the same way or as well. It's actually kind of cool because Michigan's getting a pretty good ranking out of this and is doing a lot to differentiate between the types of data. Not all states are doing that, so you can learn more about how the states are approaching things as well. Another data source that I think is worth having on your radar as you're trying to figure this all out is the CDC's excess death data, which is a really wonderful resource. It's been quiet. There's not a lot that you can, no one's talking about this, but it really is some of the underlying data that you need to be thinking about as you're trying to ask, where is this and where is it going to go? So those are some interesting things. One more on the emergency use authorization side. We recall talking about the BD Max system when it was released. Well, like all of these assays that have come out, FDA and the company have been tracking their rate of false positives and false negatives. You recall we reported that the ChemBio assay was completely pulled from the market because it was just not reliable enough as a serology assay. Not so with the BD Max, but they are finding a 3% rate of false positives with that assay. So they continue to track that, they're reporting on it, trying to figure out how to respond to that. But I think you're going to see more of this. These were pushed out very quickly without the normal controls. because we didn't have any way to get information. But now we're going to watch and we're going to see, as Dr. Ing Pottinger talked to us about a couple months ago now, what this really means in terms of positive predictive value and negative predictive value. All of that is still in flux. And so we will continue to track those things as everyone tries to figure out what are the next steps and what does this mean. That's a little bit of the news today. I want to go to my guests, and first up is Denise Graves. Denise is the University Relations Director for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. There's Denise. Denise, it's great to have you today.
Hi, Gene. Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
We're really excited about everything that MEDC has been doing, not only for the last number of years, but also with respect to COVID. Some of your colleagues from Pure Michigan Business Connect have been on the show with the tracking things that they've been engaged in. And as we start to work our way back to normal life and talking about innovations, we've all had this crash course in like, hey, let's innovate now. We got to do something. But that process has been going on for a while, and MEDC has been a leader in that in terms of funding and programs in the state. And originally those were a little bit maybe spread out, and they've really coalesced. And one of the things that you're going to be sharing with us is what you call a subway map. But I guess backing up from there 1 second, can you just tell us for a minute so that everyone knows? A lot of people haven't heard about MEDC necessarily. Can you tell us what MEDC's mission is?
Absolutely. So the Michigan Economic Development Corporation is the state's economic development arm. We also house Pure Michigan. And, we have a variety of different programs available to, businesses across the state of Michigan. And what I'll spend a little time talking about today is the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Initiative and all of the tools and funding sources that we have for entrepreneurs, whether it be a faculty researcher or someone that has a startup. We'll talk a little bit about the Smart Zone Network and some of the other funding mechanisms we have in place for, early stage technology, commercialization, and startups that come out into the market.
I'm going to bring up this subway map that you have that hopefully here is going to pop up on the screen momentarily. And after we talk about this a bit, I'd like to hear a bit more about how you got into doing what you're doing, because you're playing a very important role in this ecosystem. And we want to go there, but let's hear just a bit about this. This will give people a picture of what MEDC is doing with respect to entrepreneurship and innovation. Walk us through this picture.
Absolutely. So thank you for bringing that up, Gene. So, as they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I'm a very visual person. So I like to talk to something and kind of stay, about 30,000 foot level, if you will, so that folks get a bird's eye view of all of the different programs that the MEDC Entrepreneurship and Innovation Initiative support. When we talk about faculty researchers, translational research, early stage funding, SBIR, STTR grant support, mentors, all of that. And it's easy to demonstrate using the subway map that there's a purpose for all of these programs, and they're all very interconnected. And if you took one piece out, you might miss the next step in the process. So it's very easy to use the subway map and to be able to explain where you start, and if you started here, where you go next. I spend most of my time in the university entry station here, and I'll start there. And so the MEDC, and thanks to the Michigan Strategic Fund, which is our board that supports the funding from the legislature for these grant programs and continuation of the programs. So we have, beginning the university entry station, we have a very early proof of concept fund. And that is gives a little bit of matching funds to university projects. They have to apply through an RFP process. The tech transfer team at Michigan State University houses this program for us, and it is open to all of the universities across the state of Michigan. And I think we've had pretty good activity from most of the universities. Now, granted, we probably have 5 or 6 main universities in the state, that do a lot of, and the lion's share of the research, but I am, you know, an aggregator and an inclusive person as opposed to, you know, an exclusive person. So I'm always working with primarily 15 publics that do research across the state and hospital systems as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the MTRAC program. But the Proof of Concept Fund is kind of what it talks about. It's a proof of concept, do a couple of milestones, put a little bit of matching funds and see how far you can get the technology to maybe be the next step, matching up with a mentor and then coming into the MTRAC program. You know, the Proof of Concept Fund and what it does is very key. It's not basic research, so this might be something that you do after you go through basic research and kind of check off a couple of the boxes and then, you know, test it out a little bit with the Proof of Concept Fund. We also have the Mentors in Residence program. So the T3N, the Tech Transfer Talent Network program, supports about 25 mentors statewide. And those mentors are individuals that have very specific technological expertise, industry expertise, and they get matched up with a number of university projects and kind of help them along the way into commercialization. So a lot of the scientists don't have a lot of great experience in business commercialization industry. And so it's great to surround them with a bunch of people that do have that experience. The mentors are a great tool for universities to use. And we also have some mentors that, you know, travel to some of the smaller institutions that help with some of their technologies as well. You know, the smaller institutions don't necessarily have a tech transfer office or, you know, go about that type of business on a daily basis. So the mentors fit right in and help connect that particular project to, you know, other people across the state that are doing that type of work, or other people in the university or, you know, industry. So the mentors are a great tool set that we have available to help these technologies get out into the market. And then that leads me to the MTRAC program. So the Michigan Translational Research and Commercialization Program has been around as a statewide program since 2016. It has a laser focus on translational research. So again, not basic, not applied, but translational, which in and of itself just means translating that research into the commercial market. And if we didn't put such a spotlight or such a focus on it, a lot of times, you know, the faculty member or a scientist might do a lot of research and it might sit on a shelf because there's just nowhere else to take it. So the MTRAC hubs, and we have 5 of them across the state. MTRAC is available to all of our public institutions, as well as hospital systems and nonprofit research centers. And those 5 hubs are Life Sciences and Advanced Transportation, which is at the University of Michigan. We have an Advanced Computing Hub that is housed at Wayne State University. We have Ag Bio at Michigan State University, and then Advanced Materials at Michigan Tech University in Houghton. So again, MTRAC is a statewide program very focused on translational research. Each of the different hubs have an annual RFP process where faculty can put in a proposal. The proposal is reviewed by an oversight committee. That oversight committee is very key to the success of the MTRAC program, and that those folks are from industry, are from venture capital, angel investors, and a lot of our partners across the state, such as the SBDC, who are reviewing those proposals and providing key feedback, you know, and key levels of success on what might make that proposal, you know, successful for funding, and then getting that technology out to the market. So once they come through the MTRAC, you know, there's lots of work that gets done. Some of them still may go back and have more work to do when they're done with the MTRAC project, which is typically about 12 months. But then 2 key success measures that come out of MTRAC are a license or a startup. We also keep track of a lot of other metrics as well, but those are 2 key success factors. It's also okay to say, no, this project didn't quite work out. We need to go back and retool it and think about something else. And that's perfectly fine as well. But with MTRAC, you know, they come out into a startup or a license. Our startups come in and get introduced into the Smart Zone program. So we have 21 Smart Zones across the state of Michigan. And those organizations help the startups or help somebody that is, has not even come from a university get access to additional programs. So they write letters of support for a business accelerator fund or an emerging technologies fund. They provide mentorship. They provide introductions to venture capital professionals. So there's a whole plethora of activity that goes out at the Smart Zone and access to programs and support for those startups to kind of continue that path and down the commercial market. And all of these programs are supported with some funding through the MEDC from the MSF. And, we have 6 of us on the entrepreneurship and innovation team that work with all of these programs and help support them and, continue the funding so that we can continue the support of the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in the state of Michigan.
That's really cool. And I think one of the things that I want to make sure the audience understands is this early stage. People can find, and again, national funding for the sciences has, I believe, gone down in the last number of years. So even that has challenges. But it's one thing to say, I want to do basic research. There are mechanisms for that. This
Sure.
moment in time where you come out and you say, this could be commercialized. That is such a hard point to get through. That's right the point that you guys are embracing and providing. Not only here's a drop in the bucket, but also here's a little more, and here's more that we could do, and can we get here, and here's mentors. And it's just really neat to see it there, because oftentimes the VCs won't want to pick it up till a little bit later down the road. So you guys are bridging such an important gap. One of the things that I saw, and we didn't talk about any of this, I'm not, this isn't a paid advertisement, this is just what I've seen over 15 years, is I feel like 15, 20 years ago, the state was very fragmented. Everybody had this kind of, you come over to our side of the state and we're better at this than anybody else, or join my club and we'll take you all the way. And I feel like this has been such a breath of fresh air to try to spread the information and the resources and everything out around the state, and yet to aggregate all this together so that people have contact and can be put together. So that's just been very inspiring to watch. So I just can't say enough about this process. So Denise, how did you get to this point? How did your career lead to this point where you are here wrangling research out of universities, funding it, arranging for these kinds of programs, the programs that you run, again, the MTRAC program, the T3N program, and I hope I don't get this wrong, the Proof of Concept Fund?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. How did you come to this point where this is what you're doing? Because this is a very hard point in the process to deal with. It's very volatile. You're dealing with people who don't understand commercialization. How did you get here?
A little bit of dumb luck, I guess, if you will. But I also, when I talk and mentor with people, I also talk to them about being open to other experiences and networking and talking to people and learning about what people do and thinking about, what would I like to do? What could I get my head around being passionate about? I'm an accountant on paper, so I graduated from Ferris with an accounting degree. And then I ended up getting into sales. I sold software to accountants and CPAs, so that was kind of a good fit. And then I transitioned into, another software company. So I spent most of my career in selling software and in the business development roles in, enterprise-wide software sales, mainly in Ann Arbor. So very high tech. I spent some time in growth stage companies. We were venture backed. And then, pedal to the metal. So making sure that those VCs could get their return on their investment, went through a couple of acquisitions, and then landed for a little bit in, doing land acquisition for a real estate development firm with a couple of individuals I went to college with, and then got back into the software sales gig, and then was just looking at doing something different. Sometimes I get a little bored and want to expand my learning and what I'm involved in. I remember when Pfizer left the state and how rough things got and bumpy. And I always thought, gosh, if I could somehow play some type of a role in making sure that we didn't go through that again. And I just was always curious about how that component worked. And one of the startups I worked at had funding from MEDC. And I thought, gosh, that's interesting. So, one thing led to another, and I interviewed with the MEDC entrepreneurship team And 9 years later, I'm still going at it. So, you know, and I really enjoy what I do, enjoy working with all the universities. I mean, you talked a little bit about the ecosystem and the cohesiveness. You know, it really is a collaborative environment, even inside and with all of the universities. You know, they might compete on the football field or the basketball court, but really when it comes to these programs and comes to, you know, translational research and doing things that are for the state of Michigan, they're all in. So we all sit around the table and we all work together, and they help one another. You know, the big ones will help the smaller ones and vice versa. And you know, we're all in it to win it for, you know, economic development for the state of Michigan.
You know, I think it's interesting that you mention your sales background, because you've spent a lot of your career steeped in talking to customers.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, now you're sitting down frequently with academics who are very focused on their technology. And I know from personal experience, it's one of the things that you have to sort of bring to them is to understand your customer. Where are we going with the customer? Can you give us, and names and situations change to protect the innocent, but
Right.
can you give us some common things that you've seen? What's a good example, something that typically happens when you feel like, okay, they're getting it, and what's an example of where you go, oh boy, this is going to be a hard one when it comes to linking customer discovery to the academic innovator mindset?
Sure. And I'm sure you've heard me in meetings beat on them a little bit too when they're doing their presentation asking for funding. And I'm pretty passionate about protecting the taxpayer dollar as well. I think it's super important to understand that, you know, you're not selling, you're not pushing your product on someone. You're offering it to them, and you should take it in the light of you are solving a problem. So you're not selling, it's all about listening and solving problems. I had an old sales vice president that said you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You need to listen twice as much as you speak. So that really resonated with me. And, you know, I've had tons of sales training with solution selling, you know, spin questioning techniques, things of that nature. So, you know, when I look at all of the proposals across all of the programs, and I'm looking for, because I can't speak to the scientists. All of these people are wicked smart people. So I try to find value in drawing on my sales career and drawing obviously on my numbers, you know, experiences. But it's all about customer discovery and asking questions and understanding what the customer is looking for and making sure that you are taking it in the light of, I'm trying to solve a problem. It's not an, if I build it, they will come, because they won't. So it's really important to do that customer discovery and understand really what their problems are, why they are problems, have they tried to solve them in the past, and are they willing to pay for something to solve that problem? Now, what's really cool is through the MTRAC program, there are products that come out that you sell, but there are also products that come out that are all about patient care and getting to the bedside and going into the hospitals. And those are some really cool, really, and you see them all the time, really unique things that go on, you know, in the state of Michigan and through some of the programs. You know, as I was making some notes and thinking about today, you know, there are a few things that will increase the success of a proposal through the MTRAC program or even a project. And we're not asking for the researcher or the faculty member to be an expert in commercialization, expert in the business, while they are expert in the science. That's why we have mentors. That's why they need to work strongly with their tech transfer team, because tech transfer has a lot of things available to them that can really help move that needle on the success of their projects. So, you know, they need to understand the commercialization aspects. So what do I want to get out of this? What will it take to commercialize my product? Kind of just as in theory type of thing. Again, they need to work with their tech transfer office. They need to engage with mentors. They need to be willing to pivot. If the market's telling them something, they need to be a good listener. It's very important to leave your humility at the door and make sure that you're a good listener. And if someone tells you your baby's ugly, it's not personal. You know, they're just trying to get a point across. And then, you know, to align your milestones towards what the industry is telling you that they want and what will solve their problems. And then finally, customer validation, customer discovery, always talking to the customer and asking the customer why, and just really getting down into the weeds on that, so that you can understand what it will take to get your product to the commercial market.
That's so important. I know there have been a number of times in our own practice where somebody's come to us with an idea and they're very excited about it. It's not necessarily a bad idea, and then you go on Google and you type it in and you find out that someone's done it 20 times. And just these are the kinds of things that if you went out and talked to a few people, they would say, oh, I know that's out there, but I didn't want it, or oh, wow, I'd really love that. Those are really important points. What are some of the, I know that you and I have talked a little bit, and what are some of the places where you see if somebody is sort of resistant to really looking at the market? What are some of the hallmarks? I know that sort of an unwillingness to explore the market need, like you mentioned, is one of them. Pet ideas is another obvious one that pops up in academia. Can you talk to us about pivoting and when and where and how at an early stage? Because we hear a lot about pivoting with respect to later stage startups. Sometimes they're saying, I wish I'd pivoted earlier. Tell me about pivots at this stage of discovery and translation.
Sure. So again, in that very early stage of customer discovery, when you're working with a mentor or a tech transfer, they're looking at your IP, doing some searches. They might also come up with, okay, there's been 5 people that have done this 10 different times. So your pivots have to be quick, and they have to be, based on what the customer is telling you. One example pops into my head, and this is from a long time ago, even before MTRAC became a statewide program. There was a technology that came through the Advanced Transportation MTRAC at and the Oversight Committee and all of the oversight committees that are part of the MTRAC program for industry and venture capital, they have that special, that specialty and that technology understanding of where the MTRAC program sits. So life sciences, their oversight committee has experience in med device therapeutics, transportation, et cetera. So we have people around the table that have experience in that particular industry. So the feedback that was given to this particular project was that, I don't see this as a transportation project. I see this as a life science project for these 3 different reasons, or whatever it was. It was quite a while ago, but it was very fascinating to me. And the oversight committee gets very involved, very passionate about their work, and how they're helping these projects. And, they don't hold back, as you've seen as well. So the faculty member listened, took that advice, and made some changes to their product, and then received some funding from the life science MTRAC program, as well as some mentorship from those industry representatives and venture capital representatives, and ended up doing a spin out, licensed the technology, and I think they got acquired by a very successful organization. So watching them through that entire process was very fascinating. And, a lot of the projects will pivot a little bit. They don't have to be big pivots. You just tweak it a little bit based on what the feedback is that's given to you. And that, helps all the more of your success down the line.
That's a neat example you give, because it's not just a pivot within someone's project that within a given funding mechanism, they made a pivot. It's actually, you're within the program as a whole, and you're going, oh wait, it doesn't even belong over here. We're not gonna just keep it here because that's where it started. We're gonna let it move over here where it really belongs, which is neat, because sometimes things get stultified, right? And it's like, oh, well, you started in this track, so you gotta stay in this track. It's these silos. No, that's really a neat example.
Right.
That's very cool. You mentioned earlier, Denise, the spin solution selling. I don't know if I got the right term there. Can you, when you mentioned it to me earlier, it was very interesting to me, and I'd never heard about it before. Maybe others have, but I wonder if you could run through that really briefly in terms of this discovery.
Sure. So solution selling is just a method of selling a product in the market. So you're providing a solution. So you're not telling, you're not selling, you're providing a solution to an individual that has enough pain that is willing to pay you money for your solution. And one of the ways to get there is through questioning. So instead of, and I've done a lot of cold calling in my life, and lead generation and sales. So instead of calling up or having a conversation and just, doing a core dump, what you will, of all the feature sets of your product and then asking them, are you willing to buy? You will get a lot of no's. So you need to turn that around and the spin questioning or spin selling technique that I was trained in years ago is all about the types of questions that you go through a prospect and the way that you ask those questions. So SPIN stands for situation, problem, implication, and need payoff. And it's just a process that you do through the sales process that you sprinkle in a couple of situational questions, a couple of problem solution, a couple of implications. You come back with a need payoff. So you're building pain, what we call pain, not literal pain, but you're building this pain all the way through the process. So finally at the end, they're like, okay, uncle, I'll buy your product. So it's just a process in which that you take them through so that they come along with you and are willing to pay you money for your product.
So at the outset there, during the market discovery phase, you're never going to be able to do that process if there isn't actually some pain there, something that we're trying to solve. That's great. Well, this goes back to your 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? That's right. That's the whole thing. Yep. I love that.
And it kind of also goes along to, that's how you need to do customer discovery as well. So you need to look at it from an investigative perspective, asking lots of questions and maybe even asking the why. Why did you say that? Well, what would that mean to you? So it's just very conversational, very open, and trying to gather all of the information that you can so that you can, build that product best that you can that industry is willing to accept and to pay for.
That's great. I got one more question for you, Denise, and while I'm asking that, I just want to let folks know, if you have a quick question for Denise, feel free to raise your hand in Zoom there. We'd love to hear from you. And the question that I had, Denise, is can you just reiterate really quick, and you touched on it briefly at the beginning, in terms of, I guess really I could ask the question about MTrack, or I could talk about the whole entrepreneurial thing. I think the answer is contact us at any point during this process, right? But in terms of like the MTrack program, what's the right starting point for an academic project across the state of Michigan, any research institution in the state of Michigan? What's the right starting point for them to come to that program? And what's the right exit point? What are you trying to get them to? What's the outcome, which you did touch on briefly?
Sure. So, they approach an MTrack program that's suited to their technology. Am I in life sciences, ag, materials? Are you familiar with TRL levels that the government uses? The technology
readiness levels, yes.
Yes. So they typically come into MTrack at, I would say, maybe a 2 to 3. So they've already done the 1-2 work. Advanced might be a 2 to 3, and then they could come to MTrack. So it's in that 3 to 5, maybe 6 in there. Really kind of depends. And then we're trying to get them to maybe a 6 or 7 or an 8, so that the next phase of the process can pick it up and, finish it up, whether it be a license to a corporate partner or a startup, and then they'll go and do their SBIRs or STTRs, and then kind of take off running from there.
Great. That's wonderful. We appreciate that. We had a couple questions here. One was from Michael Ellis, and he says the program exclusively geared to the universities. It is geared towards those. How do you define it, Denise? It's towards those who are in academic research.
Sure. So the university piece to the subway map is geared towards universities. All institutes of higher learning, which typically it's the 15 public institutions, because we require matching funds. There's some requirements in the program that are more suited to those institutions that do research. And then the MTrack program adds to that hospital systems and nonprofit research centers. And we could have a whole segment on, I think a few years ago, we did a MBiz radio show on how hospital systems commercialize technology. So I know if a lot of people think about that, but I have the pleasure of working with the folks at Henry Ford and Beaumont and Spectrum, across the state in their innovations team. And they've been supported by a number of MTrack products or MTrack programs that have helped them get out into the commercial market.
Great. Another question here is, hello Denise, your subway map is fantastic. Great insight from your vacation in London, question mark.
Not sure what that means, but I think that's
funny.
another show.
I don't know. Maybe that's where it came from. Maybe it was New York, maybe it was London. I don't know. But how do you capture the need for business plan product design iterations after startup? I think the answer there is you're trying to get people to startup. This is an effort to get from academia out into a startup or a licensing deal. Is that a fair thing?
That's a fair assessment. And then as I mentioned, the smart zones have a lot of tools, a lot of people that sit down and work with startups, work with small companies. They also, we also support and work with the SBDC. So there are lots of people available through the smart zones or the SBDC that can then take it from there and work with companies on business plan execution strategies, pro formas, things of that nature.
Great. So we got a live question here, audio from Ken Spencer, and then one from Diane Bowie that she wrote in. Ken, you're live?
Yes. Hi, Denise. How are you?
Great, Ken. Good to hear from you again.
Yeah, good to see you. So
Yeah.
the survey map is terrific. It's because it lays out a timeline there that is not readily available, anywhere else, because the sites are like siloed, in there. But I think one of the important things there is that some of those programs are rolling inputs, but some are just, have specific timelines of when you apply, like MTRAC, for instance.
Correct.
Out there, and that has caused some iterations, I know, on the projects that I work with, and that they're not quite ready to go to MTRAC, for 6 months, and then they have to wait, a whole time on there. So maybe if there was some way to asterisk like which ones are rolling and which ones have specific timelines, and then also if there was a way to have a hyperlink in there, it'd be great, because I've never seen your subway map like put together anywhere else.
That's a nice subway map. Thanks for the comment, Ken. Let's talk about those dates. How does this work for the dates on the subway map? I'll bring it back up. Which of these are rolling and which of these are?
Sure. We try to keep the subway map serves the purpose of a talking point at 30,000 foot level. So if we added a bunch of things, it would muddy it up a little bit. So I certainly appreciate the feedback. But I know that each MTRAC program has its own website, and they very clearly spell out all of their different dates and things of that nature. And again, it really depends on, like for the Ag Bio MTRAC, they open their RFP late fall. They shut it down. They make their decision in early March so that the projects that have a growing season that are for plants based, they can get in the ground. So, we take a look at things like that as well. And each program kind of selects their timeline for projects. The transportation program makes their decisions in June, life sciences January, the advanced material in March, and then the advanced computing in October, November timeframe. I think he switched it to get away from the holidays. MTRAC is an annual basis. Now, a couple of programs do have kickstarts that they do twice a year, maybe 3 times a year. So that's a good way to have a shorter iteration and maybe get a kickstart program, work on your milestones while you're waiting for the full program to come around. So that's an option. Advance is an option, to get started on some of those de-risking milestones and get yourself ready for an MTRAC. So, we're real careful with having too many meetings in a rolling thing on MTRAC, because remember, the key to success to that program is the oversight committee. And those folks are from across the country, not just Michigan. And we have to be very respectful for their time that they take for reviewing proposals and coming in for meetings and for, in-person oral presentations. So I completely understand. I've heard the feedback before, but it's just one of those juggling acts and being respectful for all the professionals that help us out on the programs.
Yeah, that's great. Now, that question here is an interesting one. I think this is related especially towards the current economic crisis with COVID and everything else. The universities are experiencing spending freezes. And this one's from Kristen Wolf at U of M Tech Transfer. She says, universities are experiencing spending freezes and departments aren't willing to match. because these are often matching programs. Has MEDC ever considered omitting this requirement? I mean, because obviously you want the match there because that's the skin in the game to say
Sure.
we're really behind this, but maybe you can speak just a minute to, has there been any discussion about how do we deal with the current climate?
Very understandable. Great question, Kristen. And we're in conversations with that right now. So I don't know where that's going to end up. I don't foresee taking away that match. We just don't have enough money to fund a whole bunch of projects that can't match. You know, the universities can't match. I know it affects different universities differently. We've had phone calls on it as a team. You know, we all work as a team, all the universities that run the MTRAC programs and the MEDC. So we've had internal conversations as teams. It affects some, not others. So we're just kind of looking at that. It's very much on the radar. We very much appreciate the challenge that some of them had. So it's something that we're working through right now. We don't have a good solution yet.
That's great. I'll do one more quick question here. This one from Diane Bowie. She asked, how do we here in Michigan
Hi, Diane.
How do we compare to other states in terms of startup support? Is there
Great
any way to
question.
quantify that?
You know, I can't quantify it necessarily, but I spend a lot of time talking to a lot of different states, and I have over the years. I've been fortunate enough to be on panel discussions at Autumn, you know, the Association for University Tech Transfer Managers, as well as in-state and, you know, different webinars and things of that nature. I think Michigan still is a shining star and is still looked at to have the, you know, as a leader in having a plethora of programs across the ecosystem that supports entrepreneurship, and that they all interlink and connect together. So you do one and then you do the next. And so we're laying down enough rail for that train to keep moving. And I will put a plug for MTRAC. We received a gold award last fall from the Economic Development Council for programs that are collaborative between the state and university partners. So we were pretty excited about that.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, this has been wonderful. I think based on the time, we'll have to call it here. But Denise, thank you so much for spending the time with us and talking about this. I've seen this firsthand that there's a lot of stuff happening here, and it's coming with a lot of analysis and a lot of oversight and a lot of thought put into it. So
sure,
I appreciate what you're doing and bringing that customer discovery right down to the early stage academic innovators, which is awesome.
That's right. Well, thank you for your support. And if anyone needs more information, they can check out michiganbusiness.org/entrepreneurship.
Awesome. Thank you, Denise. Really appreciate having you today.
Sure.
Bye-bye. That's great. We always appreciate what Denise and the MEDC are doing. And of course, big organization, not just entrepreneurship, also other things as well. We heard from Pure Michigan Business Connect earlier, but these entrepreneurship and innovation things are spread all over the state, very, very active and often very quiet. So you won't always hear about it. So we wanted to give MEDC a chance to talk about that because they're doing a good job of often not tooting their own horn. So we want to toot it for them. Next up, we are going to start something really fun. I want to bring my good friend Niki Kennedy live here with us. See if we can get the microphone and the audio unmuted. Dr. Niki Kennedy, it's good to see you.
Dean, how you doing, my friend?
Doing well. This is really fun for me because it seemed like when we started COVID Connect, it was all about, hey, we're going to tell you about emergency use authorizations again and again and again, week after week after week. And now we get a little bit of space to talk about a few other things. And this is really near and dear to, I think, both of our hearts. This idea of actually, well, Denise was just talking about it, going and actually listening to the people who have the needs, who are at the front lines of delivering healthcare. And so we're tentatively calling this From the Front Lines. And thank you so much for being a part of it. Because our goal here is to actually talk about what the doctors and the healthcare providers are actually feeling and needing. So thank you, Niki, for being here. Dr. Niki Kennedy is an engineer, a vascular surgeon, and an MBA. Are we going to add law to this at some point, Niki?
No, I will
Okay.
say admittedly, I've got people for that. So
You got people for that. Yes, exactly. I wonder, first of all, you could give us just a little bit of background about your arc as to how you've come where you've come, and tell us just a little bit off the bat about ArborHive, which is an initiative that you have started. Very similar to initiatives that we've seen, except you're focused on the physicians. You're trying to get these physician innovators together and into the innovation process, which is just so exciting. Give us just the really quick overview, and we'll talk more about the details here in a minute.
well, as you said, Gene, you and I think are kindred spirits in that we believe that you have to understand the problem before you can really make some headway in terms of getting that solution together. So I started out as an engineer. My plan was to do medical device development, which I started to do when I was in college. And as you said, actually earlier in your previous conversation, that 15, 20, 25 years ago, the ecosystem here, at least in the Michigan community, really wasn't that strong. I remember being a biomedical engineering grad student up in Ann Arbor, and I was in a lab with a lot of people who had projects. Nobody was really interested in collaborating or sharing, and nobody really was willing to guide me as I tried to come up with ideas for a new project. I ended up leaving, going to medical school, because at some point I realized that I could design stuff all day, and if I didn't talk to somebody who would actually use it, how would I know if that would be useful? So long story short, ended up as a vascular surgeon.
Most people don't say that. Long story short, I ended up as a vascular surgeon. That's
This happens.
just a little bit out of the ordinary.
I tell people. Along the way, I realized that I still love the innovation piece of it, and nothing to belittle the clinical relationship that you have with patients. That's always something that's pretty special, and I don't mean to diminish that in any way. But for me, I'm a little bit like you. I'm a geek. I just kept looking for more and more. And as I got into the innovation side, I started getting involved with the business side, and through my friends at the University of Michigan, they helped me really connect with different startups. I started mentoring, and that's, I know how you and I crossed paths. I realized that there are a lot of other physicians out there who would love to chat with a startup, offer 30, 60, 90 minutes of their time just to explain their experience, and they really don't have that point of connection. You know, they're not going to stop their practice to go get their MBA. They're not going to spend, weekly mentoring sessions with the group, but they have so much knowledge accumulated, and we need to get that out into the wild, so to speak. So last year I started trying to think of ways we could do this, and it ended up being ArborHive. ArborHive is not affiliated with any health system. I always say that it's my side gig, not my clinical gig. So when I talk about ArborHive, I'm not talking on behalf of any health system, but basically I wanted to find a way to get physicians who are interested into a space where they could connect with young startup companies that could really use their expertise in their early stage development of their product or service. We all know that once you have gone down the subway rail that we were just looking at, that after a while, you wish you had done things differently back a few stops. So I think that if we can get physicians in contact with these companies ahead of time, it'll get better medical technology. Companies will be happier. Physicians will be happier with the quality of the technology that comes out, and patient care is going to be better, which at the end of the day is kind of what our society wants, I think. So
very, very much.
Yeah, you and I have talked about some different ways to do that. And one of the things we were doing is trying to figure out where clinicians run into trouble. I think that's where we decided to start this conversation. So,
yeah, this is very exciting for me, because I think we often talked, and back in the days when we could go to conferences, I heard a lot of conferences talk about reverse pitches, right? You're not going to go and pitch your product, and this is very much what Denise was talking about earlier. You don't go out there and sell what I've got. You want to hear, what do you need? And you're trying to listen to that. And of course, now that we can't all be in the same place, this may be the new way to do reverse pitches, which is really to listen in as to what the doctors and practitioners are looking for. And so you, as a practitioner, have a lot to add to that, and we're hoping as we go through these weeks of talking about this, it'll be something where we'll be hearing from you, but also you've got quite a network of people, many of them may or may not want to come and chat with us, but you're in a unique position to be able to represent an aggregate as you talk to friends and colleagues privately. And you've actually done a little bit of that already in preparation for this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to spend the next probably 3 sessions that we do this. I think you and I talked that we probably do this maybe once a month, have a session like this. And we're going to talk through some of the stage setting, because you've actually gone out and you've done some chatting with folks and actually categorized some areas where you've seen them saying, this is really what keeps me up at night. This is really where I have trouble. And some of those are surprising to me when you describe them to me. So maybe as a first step, we can go through at a very high level and just list for people, what are doctors feeling, talking, worrying about? What is their felt need as you see it from where you sit?
Well, as you and I talked, I conducted a very scientific poll of my friends who are out in the clinical world, and some common themes kept coming up. And as you said, they are very high level buckets, as you and I called them. And you can really get into some minutia with each of them. But I want to try to find a way to classify them. So there's no right or wrong with this. I'm certainly open to adding buckets or changing things. But one of the first big things I came up with were problems with our electronic medical record and our documentation process. That came up over and over again. Another big concern that I think physicians and patients both have has to do with our current insurance payer system and some of the cadence of that, some of the transparency issues associated with that as well. That has a huge impact on how we practice medicine and how our patients follow the guidelines that we give them. Communication, not only between a physician and a patient, but also between physicians and some off-site support staff like physical therapy, home nursing. That sometimes can be difficult, especially in this day where we have very disparate electronic medical record systems, and the communication barriers between them can be pretty vast, unfortunately. Then the fourth bucket that we were talking about had to do with patient compliance. Are they doing what you want them to do? What are the barriers? Why are they not doing it? We always sit there and say, oh, I wish my patients would just do what I tell them to. But it's actually much more subtle than that. It's not necessarily that a patient isn't listening or doesn't want to do this. Sometimes there are other reasons that they can't follow your instructions.
So we've got the EMR issues, electronic medical records. We've got the payer insurance issues. We've got the communication issues, which is both with the patient and also with staff and other folks.
Yes.
And then the compliance issue. And my startup medical device friends will hear that and they'll say, but you didn't tell me that you need my new device.
Yeah.
And I thought it was fascinating because as you and I were talking, it doesn't matter whether I want it to be this way or not. These are the felt issues. And oftentimes doctors are head down doing what they do. They're doing it the way that they've always done it. And so many times it is kind of if there is a new device that's going to come out, it's going to have to be something that they see has a reason. They might not have said out front, oh, I have to have this. There may be times where they do that, but many times these are actually their felt needs. It's how do I practice what I'm practicing, and how do I get outcomes for these patients? Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely. And lots of times it's not that a physician or other clinician doesn't want to use that new device. It's that we're constrained by the system that we're working in. We're constrained by what our hospital system may allow, because some of those vendor practices are pretty closely regulated, and that can vary from system to system. Sometimes it has to do with what insurance will cover, because you can have some amazing new device, but if insurance isn't going to pay for it, I promise you many patients won't be interested in that treatment option because they're not willing to pay out of pocket. Even if they could, they won't want to, because they're already paying into the insurance system. And that's just how our country is set up these days. Sometimes there are, as you know, regulatory issues. There's a great device, but we can't use it for this application. And unfortunately, one of the big drivers has to do with the medical legal risk. If we are using a device in a way that perhaps it's not meant for, or if we're trying to do something that's not commonly accepted with the practice that everyone else is doing. Sometimes that's avant-garde if it works and it's great, but if it doesn't work well, there are a lot of people out there with those law degrees who potentially might take umbrage at that. And we will get paperwork and summons and depositions to follow. And that is not a small risk. I mean, I've seen physicians whose careers have been ruined, unfortunately, because they've done something within a standard of care or practice. But that's just not how our legal system works sometimes. So those sorts of concerns really do drive, unfortunately, a lot of physician behaviors. And I'm not targeting any one group or health system or anything like that. It's, I think, as we all have seen over the years with tort reform and everything else, it's a common problem. And sometimes physicians just want to make sure they have good outcomes. We're a superstitious bunch. We've always done it this way, and we're not going to change. So I think
I know this works most of the time for what I want to do. I'm not gonna reach out there. Yeah, it's a reasonable. I think a lot of us do that.
Yes.
In a lot of parts of our life, we just don't recognize it necessarily.
Yeah,
that's great.
So keep doing it. So trying to convince a physician, it can be hard. I know.
Well, and that's, I think it'll be interesting as we go through this to find out where are the tie-ins to those kinds of things. But like Denise was saying earlier, it starts with what's the felt need. And so you've identified these 4 categories one more time for the audience. And I'm sorry we don't have a slide. That was my fault. Electronic medical records, the insurance and payer issues, compliance, and communications. And based on our discussion, before we start talking about specifics, we're going to sort of touch on each one of these. We're going to talk about payer and insurance issues a little bit today. Next time we do this, we'll talk about communication and compliance, and then electronic medical records the third time we do this. And then after that, we'll start talking about specifics. We'll try to dive in. We may end up having some guests that we'll interview and talk to them about some specifics that they have issues with. But take us through the next level down here, but still the high level landscape of payer issues, insurance issues, billing, coding, transparency, all these things.
I think most people in their gut know this because they've experienced it. Everyone has had a chance to go pick up that prescription for your mom or your dad at the grocery store, at the pharmacy, and you see the bill when you start to hand over your credit card. And you say, but my parents are on Medicare, or they've got great insurance from their employer. Why do they have a bill that's $400 or whatever it is? And that's a great question. And unfortunately, we don't always have good answers to those questions because it's a little bit of a black box right now. We are in the process in our country of trying to perhaps change that, but I think that's still an evolving landscape, and there's a lot that can be done to try to improve that level of communication that we have. Physicians also are always told you need to make sure that you check everything because, again, there's always medical legal risk, and also we want to make sure that we're doing the right things for our patients. But then insurance payers can turn around and say, you ordered an unnecessary test. We don't feel that you should have put this blood work in, and now your patient's going to be charged, again, $200 for this lab panel. We don't see that ahead of time frequently until it's too late, and we've maybe just experienced in the past and we've learned for the next time. But frequently, physicians are encountering these kinds of barriers. We don't know necessarily what's covered. We don't know necessarily what's going to be allowed, even if it should be covered. Sometimes it's just a matter of us putting appropriate documentation in, and it changes from insurance company to insurance company, I hate to say. So it can be a really confusing network. I know we had chatted in the past about, when we were prepping for this, one of the great examples of a shining star, so to speak, would be some of the new software coming out like GoodRx. If you take a look at the commercials, they say, hey, put your medication in, we'll help you find the best price on it. And my family has used it and it actually works. Why didn't we think of that before? It's just one of those kind of common sense things, but it took a while for that kind of information and technology to be readily available where you can see it advertised on TV and everyone can have it. So.
How do issues like that create the felt need for the doctor? I can understand as a patient if there's not that clarity as to what things actually cost, I'm going to get frustrated. Is that largely something that then I go complain to you as my doctor and I say, why was this? And you're kind of going, I'm not the backroom billing office. I don't actually have a clue what these things cost? Or how does that create a burden on the doctors? Again, going back to the felt need for the doctors.
You actually hit the nail on the head, Gene. That is exactly what happens. You can tell a patient, if they call you on a weekend with a problem, maybe it's an emergent problem, go to the ER, have it checked out. Well, when they go to that ER, if it turns out that it was a false alarm, they're still going to get that bill. And then they'll come back and say, you told me to go to the ER and now I have this huge bill. Nobody did anything for me. They sent me home. And having to answer those questions can be a little challenging. It'd be nice if we could make a better determination before we just sent them to the ER, maybe get a little bit more information or background and decide if that trip to the ER was really necessary. So that's one example. Another example would be with how insurance actually pays us back. And that's, again, a little bit of a backroom billing, not really related to patient care so much, but very, very important, especially for small and medium-sized physician practices. If you submit a bill to an insurance company, depends. Sometimes it doesn't get put through and you have to appeal it. That takes time. Sometimes it does get accepted, but it takes weeks or even months for you to actually see any return on that. And unfortunately, the way our payer system's set up, it depends on your health system and the rates you've negotiated, but your reimbursement rate may be different through your hospital system for whatever surgery or procedure you did than it would be at a hospital maybe out on the East Coast or in West Texas. I mean, I've had friends who have taken care of patients with, terrible gallbladders that needed to be taken out on like a Saturday night and the whole hospitalization that just followed. And they have told me that when they looked at their billing, they received $10 for that. And that is not a made up story. Yeah, so there's
this cuts both ways. It's not just the patients who are feeling like they're getting the short end of the stick. It's also the doctors sometimes who are.
Yeah, and I think any entrepreneur can respect the fact that you want to get paid for the work that you put in, especially in this case, if it's something that's potentially life-threatening for somebody. So again, you want to take the best possible care of patients, but it's also nice at some point if you do get compensated for all of the liability and time that you're putting into it. So many physicians have expressed these kinds of frustrations over the years, and I think we've all been affected by it at some point in time.
So when we talk about transparency in pricing, you've given us a nice example here of how sometimes the patient and the doctor are the last to know what the actual numbers were. And neither one of them is particularly happy with how that all worked out. That seems to me a little bit systemic, like there's a lack of communication or understanding. Do we mean more than that by transparency? Are there things that are truly hidden, or are they mostly structurally hidden?
Well, that's a good question. I think right now, many health systems are in a little bit of an uproar because of some of the transparency laws that they're trying to push through, because many of these reimbursement contracts are privately negotiated. So I don't think I would be able to comment. I don't have the base knowledge on it in terms of any details of anything to really get into that. But I think that any privately negotiated contract at one place, you can assume what's happening elsewhere. So you're going to find a lot of disparity. And I think if you said, hey, this hospital on the east side of town is only going to charge me $400 for this visit, but if I go to this other one on the west side of town, they're going to charge me $1,000. We all see where the business is going to start to go. And that is going to affect practice patterns. That's going to affect resource availability. It has some far-reaching implications.
Yeah, I guess it's true, because you've got the what was the cost of care to the hospital system, much of which is hidden within the private contracts, and then you've got the what did we charge somebody, which is not necessarily hidden, but it's sometimes hard to get to or comes way later than you'd like to know.
Yes, and it's not that hospital systems are trying to be deceitful by any means. A lot of it is just the heavily regulated billing and documentation cycles that they have to go through. It's expensive to maintain patient privacy, and it's expensive to maintain sterile precautions. These days, it's expensive to maintain sterile anything with COVID. So all prices are driven up as soon as you slap a hospital grade on whatever it is that you're trying to put in there.
Yeah, it's that assurance that we're looking for things like privacy and sterility and other things like that. And of course, like we were noting during the COVID crisis, it's like, why are we burning through so much PPE? Well, you don't normally assume somebody is infectious, but we were entering a period where you were kind of assuming that everybody is potentially infectious. And so that certainly changed the dynamic.
Many hospitals are now, and private physician offices are requiring COVID tests before they'll even let patients in the door for any kind of procedure, no matter how big or small. And there are windows on that. I had to cancel a surgery because a patient got a COVID test and it took 4 days for the result to come back, and it expired within 72 hours. So we had to reschedule her whole procedure. So,
oh, wow. So it wasn't that it was positive, that it was negative. It was just that structurally the timing window got missed.
unfortunately,
That's fascinating. Other high-level things with payer and insurance issues that we should talk about at this level before in a future week we sort of dive down and maybe explore some individual issues?
the one other thing that really comes to mind is that there's a big gap between small and medium-sized practice, especially a private practice, and a big health system. A lot of the bells and whistles that make this kind of coding and documentation and bill submission and appeals process better, it's expensive software, and services obviously put a lot of effort into it, so they should charge a high price tag, but it often is not accessible to a private practice physician or a small group of 30 docs or less. So if they are trying to make their way through this, they're often stuck spending a lot of extra time doing things manually or having to hire extra people to help them wade through all of this. So I feel that there's a big need for our private practice, smaller medical group population, so to speak. We always think of big healthcare systems, and I think the little guys get forgotten. And unfortunately, they are working hard, taking care of their patients. And unfortunately, now they're also there on Saturdays and Sundays doing billing and coding on top of it. Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing where you really do have a lot of basis in even the consumer software market for upstarts to come in and do something for those smaller entities. But of course, now there's the increase in regulation and HIPAA compliance and other things like that aren't just sit down at my coffee table and do it. I've got to actually have that expertise. But nevertheless, there is opportunity and like you say, interest there as well for those small players. No, it's fascinating. And I think what you've done today is to unpack a little bit for us, because we often think, oh, the cost of healthcare is out of control. Those are the terms we think in, the news blurbs that we think in. But I really like this breakdown of there's uncertainty and lack of information to the patient, to the doctor, inherent within the system in its own inefficiencies. And a lot of those are imposed just by what we have to do to comply with HIPAA or other things. And yet then there's also the back end where, sure, you're going to have these private negotiations, but then that creates another layer of lack of transparency. So what we've done is really to unpack a lot of different layers here, all of which are contributing to uncertainty and probably to added cost ultimately in the delivery of healthcare, which then affects everybody. Well, that's exciting. I want to take a minute and see if any of our guests have a question. I'm going to go to our written chat thing and see if we have. Also, feel free to raise a hand if you have any questions. I see a hand up. I'm not sure whether it's a legacy hand or not. I'm going to see if our friend Olaf has a question for Dr. Kennedy.
Sorry, actually, I guess I had still raised my hand from
Your hand was up from before. Okay, thank you so much. Sorry about that. That's always the danger when there's a hand up. I should have cleared the hands. I appreciate that. Olaf's a great guy. I'll give just a minute for any further questions. Next time we do this, which will be in approximately a month's time, we're going to go on to two other issues that Niki mentioned: communication and compliance, and we'll have a similar discussion about those. And then in the final session, before we start talking specifics, we're going to talk about electronic medical records and some of the physician complaints surrounding those. And if you're listening to this and you have questions or you have points you'd like us to focus in on, we would love to hear from you. and get those questions in there. Nikki, you were about to say something.
Oh no, I'm sorry. We might need 2 sessions for the EMR complaints because they are so prevalent.
That's a huge one. Well, and that's funny. I'll preview this now. I'm waiting for a second in case anyone else has a question. But you would think that the whole promise of EMR was going to be that all of these horrible paper records that we had to physically go see were not doing it for us. But it sounds like EMRs are creating an awful lot of problems. And I guess one of the questions, maybe we'll save this as a question for that time, is have they created more problems or have they solved more problems? That's going to be a hot button issue. We'll have to think about that one before we go there. But
yes, probably need a fresh Friday for that one.
Fresh Friday for that one. Sounds good. Well, I don't see any questions right now, but Niki, thank you so much. We are excited to together inaugurate this from the Frontlines segment. Niki, tell us just once more a little bit about ArborHive, what you guys are doing, and how folks can connect.
So, as I mentioned before, ArborHive is just the little side project that includes an innovation network where I'm trying to connect physicians who are interested in learning and participating in this innovation process with different groups and startups that could really use some of their clinical expertise. It is a nonprofit, so there's no charge for this right now. It's a growing grassroots effort, so we are always adding more physicians from different disciplines into the fold. I would say if you're interested in learning more, go to www.arborhive.com. We also have our monthly newsletter, which I'm hoping to get out on Monday. Please feel free to subscribe to that. I actually went out on a limb and put together a podcast, go figure, to try to educate physicians a little bit on this so that they can get their feet wet with it, again, not having to go through a whole MBA process. And finally, I've been doing, and you can find it on LinkedIn as well as on the site, a whimsical blog on the business of medicine called The Lonely Surgeon, which is www.lonelysurgeon.com, which I'll let you just go there and you'll see what it is. So.
Well, I was listening to your podcast the other day, and it's very well done. And it's just a pleasure to listen to. And I think especially any doctor innovators would really resonate because you're talking about things that they may have thought about, but haven't really known where to go or how to engage. So it's nice to hear it from a fellow doctor. Well, this is wonderful, Niki. We're looking forward to the next installment of this coming up in just around a month. We'll fix the date in the coming weeks, and we're really thankful to have you here today.
Thanks for what you and your team at Into Being are doing, Gene. You guys are great. I appreciate the opportunity.
Appreciate it, Niki. Thanks a lot. That's great. I'm really looking forward to as we come through and keep talking about those doctor needs, because that's one of the things that, like Denise was talking about, startups and innovators are often have to be encouraged to think about. And what better than to have the doctors sitting there thinking about what their needs are. I love that so much. We've spent quite a bit of time today, and it's all been wonderful stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to push the FDA recall discussion off for a week, and we'll cover that later. I do want to give just a little bit of time to do any Q&A or check-ins that folks would like to do. I'm going to bring up one thing right here, and I want to just note our friend Murray Godwin from SGS. I just opened your line, Murray. I'm going to bring up a quick screen share here, and this is just Murray's card. Murray has been a contributor in the past and was very instrumental in getting word out there during the COVID crisis. And I've asked Murray to come on in a future week. It's going to be probably about 2 weeks from now, to talk about what SGS has been seeing in their testing services. Murray, are you live?
Yeah, I'm here.
So yeah, we just wanted to preview coming up in a couple weeks. You're gonna come on. You're gonna tell us a little bit about what you guys have been seeing, the increase in people coming asking for testing services for masks and stuff like that. But I guess in just a moment, could you just give us another brief overview about what SGS does and what services you guys offer?
Absolutely. And again, thanks for the invite. Glad to come along and do this and talk about these things. If you haven't heard of SGS, we're the world's leading inspection, verification, testing, and certification company. And we've been quite busy over the last couple of months now with COVID-19, in particular testing medical PPE. We do also test some medical devices, but in particular, we've focused a team on medical PPE because there was so much of a push for that. And we're talking about the different types of masks, the coverings, gowns, those kinds of things. We've seen peaks and valleys since March. We have been hot and heavy with testing masks, then it switched to gowns, and then back to masks, and we're seeing a rise again as it looks like there's another rush for more PPE. So bottom line here is if you're producing medical PPE and you need to find out any information about testing in particular, there are a lot of standards involved in testing this or these things that come through the CDC, ASTM, ISO. We do that kind of testing. We've got 3 main branches that do this. I'm based out of Appleton, Wisconsin, although I live in Florida at the moment. And Grass Lake, Michigan is another facility, in Rutherford, New Jersey. So between the 3 of us, we are doing everything we can for everybody that's producing the PPE and trying to get this testing done as quickly as you can. So if you've got questions about that, Gene's got my contact information up on the screen. By all means, get in touch with me and we'll start a dialogue and help you any way that we can with getting testing done for you.
Well, we appreciate what you're doing, Murray, and it was great to have you come on so early in the whole process to get word out, because people were kind of like, well, we got this stuff, but where do we test it? So we'll look forward to catching up with you in about 2 weeks to talk a little bit more about some of the details of what you've been seeing, because I know our audience would love to hear what's been going on in that world of new masks and gowns and other PPE. Thanks, Murray.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're going to give another chance for any Q&A, any check-ins that folks would like to do. If there's an effort that you're part of that you'd like to just create a brief blurb about, we're happy to let you talk about it for just a moment. Any questions, any announcements? Ken, Spencer.
Yes, Gene. So actually, this is a question for Murray. So as you know, we've been working on negative pressure tents and helmets, and we actually have our EUA submission in for those projects, as well as a DoD SBIR Phase 2 program in there. The EUA feedback has been great, so that's good news. But we would like to begin in parallel our 510K submission, because we know the EUA is not going to last forever. So the question is, does SGS IPS testing do things that would be appropriate for our negative pressure helmet and tent applications?
Murray, your line is live.
Okay, thanks for that question, Ken. I would say yes, there are things that we will do and can do. In particular, in Appleton, Wisconsin, that facility, and my main focus working with it from that facility or with that facility has all been in paper and non-wovens. And in particular, you're talking about negative pressure tents. I can tell you there's some kind of non-woven material that's being used for that, I'm assuming. We can do and will do physical testing, and we can, if you have a need for a particular type of test, create a test. So we can custom tailor. That's basically what I'm trying to say. If you want to send me some information on that, some most basic information about what these things are and how we can see what they are and we can kind of evaluate it, I'm positive we can do some testing on that and try to get you. You need to be certified or have something verified, we can do that for you.
Well, I'm sure as part of the 510K proposal, we've done some initial testing ourselves, which we submitted with our EUA submission, but the 510K submission is going to require, I think, significant more data.
Yeah, and I can get you some more definitive answers on.
Oh, Murray, are you there?
Yeah, I had a mic problem there.
So sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. We can send me an email and we'll start a conversation with that on that, Ken, and I'll get some of our. I'm by no means not a lab tech. I can't tell you all the specifics about testing, but all of those people that are in Appleton, I've got a good relationship with them. We will figure out what you need and we will help you get there.
That's great. Thanks, Murray.
Great.
You
Love
bet.
making those connections. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Great. And with that, I believe we are done for today, Friday, July 10th. Thank you for tuning in to MedTech Crossroads. We're looking forward to being with you next week. We've already got a jam-packed schedule for next week, so we're looking forward to having our guests on. And we thank you for being with us today. Hope you enjoy this weekend coming up. Talk soon. Bye-bye.